What is your motivation for learning English? Do you sometimes become demotivated and less enthusiastic about your progress? Well, on today's podcast, I'm talking with Christian from Canguro English about motivation and how it's important for you to set realistic expectations when it comes to learning English. Welcome to Aprender Inglés with Christian and Craig. Hello and welcome to the podcast. If you are a new listener, my name's Craig, and this week my regular co-host Reza is not with us, but we do have a fantastic guest, Christian Saunders from Canguro English. Now, I've been following Christian's excellent YouTube channel for a long time, and I was really happy when he agreed to join me on the podcast to talk about motivation. And a huge thank you to Catty from the Facebook group, The Chat Box, because it was Catty who suggested I contact Christian to come and talk to me on the podcast. So thanks, Catty. Without you, this conversation wouldn't have happened. Now, Christian is a highly experienced English teacher who is constantly questioning how we learn languages and what's the best approach for teaching and for learning English. Links to everything we discuss in this episode, including Christian's website and his wonderful YouTube channel, can be found in the show notes to this episode at inglespodcast.com/Christian. Christian. So don't worry if you're driving or exercising, if you're walking the dog or you're out doing the shopping. You don't need to write anything down. Just relax and enjoy my conversation with Christian Saunders from Canguro English. Christian, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's really nice to meet you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's great to be here.
But let me start by asking a question I ask guests who come on who aren't familiar to the listeners. Where is your accent from?
Wow. The question of accent, I think, is always a hot topic, especially in the world of language learning. People very strongly associate accent with their level of English. If I sound like a British person or an American person, then that means that I have achieved some kind of higher level of language, which isn't true at all. And the reason I'm saying this is because my accent, the same as the accent of everybody who's listening, your accent reflects your experiences in the world. And my accent shows that I was born in Australia, but that I actually haven't lived in Australia for more than 20 years. So my accent is a real mix of all of the places that I've lived. My wife is British, so definitely it has a strong British influence. Basically, when I go to England, people think that I'm Australian, and when I go to Australia, people think that I'm British.
It is interesting because I can't hear a strong Australian accent when you're speaking. I'm wondering if maybe some of your wife's British accent has rubbed off on you. To rub off means you've kind of taken some of her pronunciation and integrated it into the way you speak. Is that possible?
Absolutely. Not only her accent, but also the vocabulary she uses and the grammar structures. Because, yeah, she's the person that I spend the most time with and the person that I have spent the most time with over the last 20 years. So, you know, they say that people who have dogs, eventually the dogs start to look like the owners of the dog.
Or vice versa, maybe.
Vice versa, because they spend so much time together. I think accents are kind of similar. Well, this is a very a very important maxim. A maxim is like a truth or a rule, a saying, yeah, in linguistics, that you talk like who you talk with. So that's why our accents, will always reflect the people that we spend time with.
You probably don't get this, but I, being married to a Spanish lady, often get the question, so what do you speak at home? Do you speak English with your wife or do you speak Spanish? And we speak Spanglish because I take things from her, she takes things from me, and we might start a sentence in one language and finish it in the other. And we've also got our shared words that nobody understands. It's really weird. I might use one of those words when I'm speaking to another Spanish person, and I get that deer in the headlights stare. I haven't got a clue what you're talking about because that's our language. It is true when you spend a lot of time with people, you do kind of develop your own language.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely we all accept the idea that there are different languages in the world, and also we accept the idea that within language there is a lot of variation. Some people like to divide it into these, things they call dialects. You have like American English or British English or Australian English, right? But I think often people forget about the idiolect, right? Which is the way that you personally use a language. And you're not alone, Craig, as you know. I think everybody develops their own vocabulary between friends, between partners.
Yes, and peer groups.
And I think the coolest thing, that there's lots of research to show that people who switch between languages, or like you with Spanglish, people who mix languages, it's actually a sign of a higher language ability, right?
Thank you.
Yeah,
I thought it was bad, but you're telling me it's good. So
it is good, and many people think that they think that it's like a sign that, like, I don't know the word in Spanish, so I'm just going to say it in English, or vice versa. No, it's a good thing because it shows that you understand the structures of both languages. People shouldn't feel bad about doing it. It's a good thing.
I really like your approach to learning and teaching languages, the fact that you focus, as I do, a lot more on communication and a lot less on correctness and perfect grammar, etc. You've said that learning a language is a process of making mistakes. Can you expand a bit on that? I mean, we don't want to make mistakes, do we? And a lot of my students get very anxious about this. So how can they get over this anxiety and realize that they need to make mistakes to learn to speak better English?
Yeah. I think that every field of learning has its own stereotypes, and it has its own information, and also, unfortunately, it has its own misinformation. And I think that it's something very specific to the world of language that people think that they shouldn't make mistakes. I'm sure, Craig, the same as me, you've probably seen teachers on the internet who say, like, you shouldn't speak until you're ready.
Yeah, don't say this. Absolutely.
As well, yeah, like, don't say this, and you shouldn't say anything until you're ready because the mistakes will be like fixed in your mind forever.
That really annoys me. That really does annoy me when I hear that. And
Yes.
and more I'm seeing people on YouTube and other platforms say, don't say this in English, when it's perfectly okay to say it. Why can't I say it? Why are you telling me not to? Oh, don't get me started.
It's well, unfortunately, this is just people following the algorithm, right? They're looking for views and clicks.
Yes.
This is nothing related to real language teaching.
So, Christian, how can students get over this anxiety? How can they realize that it's not necessary for them to worry about making mistakes because they need to in order to learn?
So it's clear that it is something very specific to the world of language learning, because if people just stop and think for a moment, I don't think that they would apply that same rule to learning basically anything else in their lives. Like, imagine if I said to you, I'm going to teach you to play the guitar, but I never want you to ever make a mistake and play the wrong note.
That's a really good analogy. I like that, yeah.
Or anything, like I want you to paint a picture, but don't paint until you're sure that you can paint it perfectly. Okay, it's. I think it's actually a very destructive relationship with learning to enter the learning process with the idea that you must be perfect. And even if you believe that you should be perfect, language doesn't operate on the idea of right and wrong. Language is a creative art. There's always a million ways to say the same thing. And right and wrong, almost always in language, is a social judgment. And it's really important that people take a moment to examine their relationship with making mistakes and realize that it's an impossible dream to learn anything without making mistakes.
What would you say to a student who says to you, Christian, you're not correcting me enough. I want you to correct me more while I'm speaking?
Look, that is, I think any language teacher who's actually spent time with students knows students who are exactly like that, right? I'm sure, Craig, that you've had students who like, please correct me more. No, I'm sure you've had that.
I have. It's always a balance. It's always knowing when to do it, when's the right moment to correct and focus on that improvement, getting the ship going in the right direction, and when to just let the creativity go and let them find their way themselves. It's a balancing act. It's juggling.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the skill of a good teacher is knowing when to just let a student go. Okay, maybe they're telling a really great story about what they did on the weekend. And during this story, almost every sentence has a problem. Maybe they're not conjugating the verb correctly, or they're using the adjective wrong, whatever. But in that moment, I'm not going to stop them and correct them because I want them to just have the joy of communicating what they want to say, right? And yeah, maybe after they're finished telling me the story, we can go back and look at the problem. But it depends on their level of English as well. All of these, like you said, the balancing act, being good at that is all part of learning to be a really good teacher, right?
Absolutely. It's like the classic example of the student arriving late to class and the teacher says, what happened? And she said, oh, I'm sorry I'm late. My grandmother died. And you go, no, the correct is to say my grandmother died. I mean, there's certain times when you need to correct the student and certain times when you just have to understand the meaning behind the words and move on. So
that is a great example. Oh my God, I love that.
Moving on.
I'm going to steal that.
Well, maybe you can help me then, because I want to focus next on motivation. And it's something I've been struggling with, motivation. When we think of students in particular studying by themselves, now I've been having motivation issues recently, and I've read the self-help books, focus on my why am I getting up in the morning, eat the frog, do the difficult thing first, and develop systems, not goals, etc., etc. But what advice can you give listeners for not getting stuck and developing some important habits and systems when they're studying? Because there is this intermediate plateau that some students hit. And I think you said once in an interview that success in language learning is about having a need or creating a need. Is that why some students are not maybe reaching their language goals? Because it's a wish and a dream to improve rather than an intrinsic need that they have?
Yeah. I mean, the topic of motivation is obviously a complex one. I think that maybe we could roughly know, or in a general way, you could divide students into kind of two categories. There are people who have some type of external motivation, and maybe it's because they need to pass an English exam so they can go to study in another country, or they want to immigrate. And those are people who have a very strong need to be successful at completing something specifically in English. So, like for those students, like if a student comes to me and says, look, I need to get this certificate so I can go and study in the United States. Can you help me? In that kind of class, my objective is to help them to pass that exam. Basically, we're just going to spend all of our time doing exam techniques because that's what's necessary to do that. But then you have other types of students who are motivated by, let's say, internal motivation. No, like maybe they just feel like, wow, it would be cool to speak English, or I really want to read that book, or maybe they're just kind of fascinated by languages in general. And they're definitely the most difficult types of students to help with motivation. But I think...
What? Sorry, why is that? I would have thought the opposite. I would have thought that
oh, really?
if they've got the motivation inside them, like a fire that's burning, then they would have a desire to study because they're immersing themselves in the culture, for example. Maybe they like English football and they want to go and watch a game, or I don't know. But the person who's studying for an exam, yes, that outside motivation is important, but it doesn't seem as strong to me.
I mean, the difference perhaps with the first group, with the, like, let's say an exam group, is that they have no choice, okay? If they are really serious about like going to study in another country, then they have to do it, okay? And they are the students who will come to class even if they hate it, even if they're tired and they're bored, they will come and they will suffer through the class, right? But the second group, is where you find so much variation. There are students, Craig, as you know, right? We've seen these students. They are unstoppable, just unstoppable. They love everything about studying English. They'll spend every single moment of their day consuming content, being curious. Like those people will, of course, they will go on to be successful in their language. Because it's like you said, like a fire inside them. But then, also within that group, you have people who they really want to do it, but they don't realize how hard it is. Okay. Again, I think I'm very sorry to say that there's so much misinformation in the world of language learning that people have this idea that, you can do amazing things in 30 days or 90 days or whatever. You could, right? You could if you didn't have a job and you were were one of these. Yeah, you had no life, no children. Yeah, you can do amazing things in 90 days. And a lot of these people who have these kind of incredible language learning methods, they are people who are obsessed with language and who will spend every hour studying. Of course, they're going to get results. But for normal people, we have responsibilities and we have other kinds of motivation to fight with. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe I've had a big day and I just want to watch Netflix. I'm not interested in using my brain in that way. But how can we help someone like that? Well, there was a Greek philosopher called Epicurus, and he said, he was talking about food and wine, okay? He said, we should look for someone to eat and drink with before we look for something to eat and drink.
Well, I agree with that, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to steal that philosophy and apply it to language, and I would say that you should look for someone to use language with before you try to learn a language.
That's wonderful advice.
And I think people are often very amazed by children. They're like, why can't I learn a language like a child? And basically what separates children from adults, the reason that children are always 100% successful at learning a language is that they have no choice, right? The necessity exists in every part of their life. If they want to play with their friends, if they want food, if they want toys, if they want to be a human being, they need language. And yes, I agree with my old self that creating necessity, finding people to use language with, is a solution to many, many problems of motivation.
I like that a lot. I can remember years ago when I was designing the first course for my website, Mansion Inglés, and I worked obsessively and I was motivated in a way that I'd never been motivated before. And I've heard you say that sometimes you get so involved in a project and so obsessed that you work through the night as well. I haven't experienced that level of motivation for years. I'm wondering where it comes from. Is it natural or inborn in your genes? And you mentioned that kind of language learner before, like a sponge, the language learner that soaks up everything because they're so motivated to get proficient at English. Or is it something we can learn? Is it something that we can develop a habit for? Or maybe are our habits as we get older, are they stronger than motivation we might have for a new project that comes along? It's something I've been thinking about, and I think we can apply it to language learning. Is it contagious? How can we pass it on to our students?
It's interesting how this question is obviously way bigger than just the world of language. People have problems with motivation in every part of their lives. I don't really think there are any clear answers. I really feel like that there's too much variation between people as individuals.
Where does your motivation come from? Where do you find motivation to create things?
Well, so recently, because I'm 44 years old, and only last year I was diagnosed as an adult with attention deficit disorder, right? Mm-hmm. Which was a surprise for me because it explained many of the behaviors, especially sometimes the destructive behaviors that I have had throughout my entire life. So for somebody like me, I am motivated by maybe things that are different to other people. So personally, I'm motivated by doing things that are difficult. I really enjoy starting a task that I have no idea how to finish. I enjoy starting a task that I don't know how to do at the beginning. I just personally love the challenge. Now, that might not be the same for other people, right? Like, have you reflected about why you were so motivated, during these years when you were building and you were working all night? Did you come to any conclusions yourself?
I think it was because I was younger. Okay. And I think we have more energy and more motivation. But also it was something new, and I was creating something new. And I think if we keep doing the same thing year after year, then motivation tends to drop off or gets less. And I think that's true of that intermediate plateau I mentioned. And when you see progress and you see something going up, then that motivation builds like a wave. But when you can't see a lot of difference in your performance as a language learner, or in anything, or learning the guitar, then I think you lose motivation, and I think we're fed by progress and improvement. Some of us.
Yeah, you're definitely right. I think the intermediate plateau is a very cruel phenomenon. Actually, it's important for learners to understand why it happens. And I think one of the reasons that people experience the intermediate plateau is just because of the way that language works, right? So vocabulary is not distributed in English, okay? It's not used in English or any other language in an even way, okay? So for example, I do not use the word eloquent as often as I use the word go. I think we all, we all have this idea that there are some words that are just really common, right? We use them all the time.
Yeah.
And there's other vocabulary that is far less frequent. Actually, this is the main explanation for that feeling of the intermediate plateau in language learning. Because, like you said, at the beginning, what you're actually doing is you're learning, let's say, the first 200, first 500, maybe first 1,000 of the most frequently used words in that language. And also, you're gaining the fundamental grammar structures to use those words. And so in the first, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, you really, like you said, you see progress and you feel the progress. But this is the cruel thing, okay? This is the horrible part, is that in order to maintain that same feeling of progress with language, you have to exponentially increase the amount of hours that you use the language. Actually, there was an amazing study that was done by Paul Nation, specifically about vocabulary learning. And he showed that at the very beginning, when you first start to learn English, you could pick up all the vocabulary you need, like the first 1,000 words, by only reading for a maximum of 20 minutes a day, right? That would give you enough exposure of the most frequent words, 20 minutes a day. Now, if you want to move to the top 10,000 words in English, which doesn't seem like a big difference, right? 10,000 words, okay. But again, because language is not linear, because it's not evenly distributed, you would have to read for more than 8 hours every day to have the same amount of contact with that less frequent vocabulary.
That makes a lot of sense, because I remember my car registration number, my phone number, my identity card number, because I'm often saying it, but I could not tell you my passport number, even though it's an important number, because I don't say it enough. So the more numbers or words you have in your head that you're absorbing, the more input, the more you have to use them and practice them, speaking or writing, to increase and expand your vocabulary. That makes so much sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and this, it goes back to the question of motivation as well, right? So many people immediately think that, well, if I'm going to learn English, then I should be fluent, right? That should be my objective. But people need to be honest and realistic and say that, well, fluency in a language is the work of a lifetime, and it requires incredible amounts of dedication. And it's fine. It's an absolutely perfect objective to only be able to talk about dogs. Okay? Or it's a perfectly fine objective to only be able to go to a restaurant and order a pizza. Having realistic expectations is a massive part of being successful. Again, to make a comparison, which is probably not a brilliant comparison, but I think you play the guitar, right, Craig?
No, but I just liked your analogy, so I repeated it.
Okay, sorry. Well, I mean, I think very, very few people would start to play the guitar and say, one day I would like to be playing classical guitar in Carnegie Hall, right? I want to be one of the world's top guitar players. No, right? People just want to maybe play around, or they want to play their favorite song from the radio, whatever. But saying that you want to be fluent in a language is just as difficult as wanting to be like a professional musician. It's really hard.
Yeah. Managing expectations is extremely important. Okay, any final thoughts? Do you want to add anything on the topic of motivation? Because I have a couple of quick fire questions off topic to ask you. Any final thoughts?
I would only summarize, and I would say that find a reason to use your English and have realistic expectations. I think they're the two keys to maintaining your motivation.
Finally, a couple of quick fire questions, Christian. Is there anything that you've changed your mind about recently? Could be anything, not necessarily connected to language teaching.
A million things, Craig, a million things. In fact, I disagree with my old self about a million things. Yeah, to give you just a couple of examples, I used to tell people that it was impossible to learn how to listen because listening was just a skill that you did just by practicing. And then I realized that I was completely wrong about that. And in fact, I made an entire listening course because I wanted to show myself that I was wrong. And also I've changed my mind about
Sorry, before you move on from that, can you expand on that a little? So you used to think that you could teach listening or you couldn't teach listening?
Yeah, no, I used to think that you could not teach people listening. I used to think that, of course, like, how can you teach listening? You can only practice listening by listening. Like, what is there to teach? But yes, I was very wrong about that. In fact, in the same way that you can become active and you can become aware of, let's say, grammar mistakes, or the same way that you can actively improve your vocabulary, you can also actively improve your listening.
Yeah, someone once said we listen very often in order to reply, not to understand. And I like that very much.
Yes. And you can see it in people's faces, right? When they're just waiting for you to finish speaking so they can speak. It's not nice.
Yes. They're making eye contact, they're nodding, but they're not really listening to you.
Yeah.
Exactly. They're doing all the right things with their body language, but they're not actually listening.
Exactly.
Which is what I should have done when you answered me, and then I wouldn't have had to ask you to repeat what you had said in the beginning. Christian, what?
Actually, I think I think that the main thing that I have changed my mind about is there was a period of quite a few years where I was really obsessed with reading all of the research about language learning. And I believed that whatever was proven in the laboratory was correct, was true, and we should all do that immediately. But then what I realized is that what happens in a laboratory and what happens in one particular study is too small. No, and it doesn't reflect the experiences of real teachers in the classroom. And I've completely changed my mind about that. And now I believe that, yes, the research is important, but what happens in the classroom and what teachers know about what happens in the classroom, all of their years of experience, is more important than the research. Yeah.
I'm pleased to hear you say that, because that means I don't have to go and read all the research that I haven't read yet. So thank you.
There's too much, right?
I can only imagine. What one thing, Christian, if you were to tell someone about yourself, would they find it difficult to believe?
Oh my God. Okay. I've thought about it, Craig. I have an answer now.
Okay. It's a tricky one. It is a tricky question.
I was born in Australia, and Australia in general, I would say, is quite a macho society, right? So the men are very manly. And so in that respect, I'm not a very typical Australian, okay? Because I don't know. Let's say I'm not so much of a manly man, not so much of a macho man. In fact, in one of my previous jobs, my nickname was Princess, because they kind of considered me to be very, like soft, like a princess. So many people would probably be surprised to learn that I actually spent quite a number of months working as a builder. moving heavy objects, working with concrete, nails and screws and And of course, I hated every minute of it.
Yeah, well, that's something we've got in common because I've worked in construction as well, and it is a very macho environment. Yeah, you have to kind of put on a bit of a front.
Yes,
in order not to be bullied. Yeah. Christian, thank you very much for your time. Before you go, you do have a website called canguroenglish.com. Can you tell people what they can find there?
Yeah, so on my website, people can find links to all of my free content. So I have hundreds of videos on YouTube, podcast as well, and also they can download some PDFs that I've made about learning English. Also, people can join my academy, which is a combination of pre-recorded video courses about different subjects, about reading, listening, grammar. And also it has live classes with teachers from all over the world. So if they join the academy, they can join more than 100 live classes per month. It's all unlimited access. And the other thing they can find on my website is information about my English immersion retreats. In May 2023, so in a short time from now, we are going to Gran Canaria in the Canary Islands.
Lovely.
And we're going to spend 7 days in this amazing 5-star resort. It's completely immersed in English. It's a combination of classes, excursions, and also just some time by the swimming pool, right? So yeah, if anyone's interested in transforming their motivation, transforming their relationship with English, the retreat is a great opportunity to do that.
Fantastic. Who wouldn't want to go to Gran Canaria to improve their English? I think that will be motivation for anyone. So definitely go over there and have a look at that. I will, of course, put links to Christian's website, his YouTube channel, and other relevant links that you'll find in the show notes at inglespodcast.com/Christian. And before I let you go, I want to mention that you do some wonderful work, some charity work with the Pencils of Promise program in Laos, and you'll find details of that on the website as well. So please go and have a look at the charity section of Christian's website. Christian, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope we can do this again in the future.
Thank you, Craig. It's the pleasure was all mine. I appreciate it, and I'll see you soon.
Many, many thanks to Christian for his time, and thank you for listening to this episode. I hope it has increased your motivation and helped you to understand a bit better your own motivation or lack of it in more detail. And remember, the links to everything we've spoken about on this podcast, including Christian's Canguro English Academy, can be found in the show notes to this episode at inglespodcast.com/Christian, CHRISTIAN. But what do you think? Do you find it difficult to motivate yourself to improve your English? Have you experienced this intermediate level plateau that we spoke about? And what do you do when your motivation drops? We would love to hear about your experiences, so why not send us a voice message and you can practice your speaking at the same time. It's very easy. Go to speakpipe.com, that's speakpipe.com/Inglespodcast. If you want to contact us by email with a comment or question, you can write to me at Craig, CRAIG, at inglespodcast.com, or emails to Reza go to BelfastReza, BELFASTREZA @gmail.com. This podcast is sponsored in part by MansionIngles.com. If you're interested in a paid course to help you with your English, go to store.mansioningles.net. And thank you to all of you who are helping us by supporting this podcast on Patreon. And you too can join our Patreon program for as little as $1.50 per month. And when you do that, you get instant access to transcriptions of this podcast so that you can read every word that you hear. Go to Patreon, patreon.com/Ingles podcast. I don't have time to mention everybody who is supporting us, but I want to say hello and thank you to our latest supporters who have joined us this month. Welcome to Jaume Ferrer Muñoz, Luz Viviana Moreno, Carlos, Maria Madariaga, Pedro Carrillo, Susana, and special thanks to Francisco Otero and Arnhild Kessel, who are sponsoring us for more than the $1.50 minimum. In next week's episode, Reza will be back with me and we'll be speaking about cyber security and answering Jose's question about how you can protect yourself against cyber attacks. So join us next week for some technology vocabulary. Until then, thanks for listening and have a wonderful week. The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later. Psst. Hello? Are you still there? Oh, you are. Fantastic. You must be very keen to improve your English and you must be highly motivated. But how is your speaking? Do you need to improve your fluency and confidence when you have conversations in English? Do you perhaps get a bit stuck sometimes? If you do, I can help. My next online conversation course is starting very soon. There's a midweek group on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and there's also a Sunday group if you're very busy during the week. The maximum is 8 students per group, and the price is €128 for 12 hours of lessons on Zoom. So, if you want to join me and a small group of motivated students to improve your speaking, send me an email to Craig, C-R-A-I-G, @inglespodcast.com and I'll send you more details. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you on the inside.